It started with a shove, not a loud argument, not a fight. Just a hard, dismissive shove that nearly sent the woman stumbling backward off the steps of one of the most prestigious office towers in the city. "Ma'am," the security guard snapped, holding out his arm like a barrier. "You can't loiter here. This is private property." The woman said nothing. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't flinch, didn't protest, didn't yell. She just stood there, silent, watching him, taking in his tone, his posture, the way he looked at her like she was dirt on marble. From her scuffed sneakers to the oversized hoodie, from her frizzy, wind-blown hair to the worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. Everything about her screamed not supposed to be here. And that's exactly what the guard believed. He sneered, stepped closer, towering over her now. "People like you don't belong in places like this. Move along, or I'll have you escorted out." The woman blinked slowly, then looked past him, toward the sleek glass doors behind him. Her voice was soft, almost bored. "I just need to drop something off." "Not without a badge, you're not," he barked. "I'm not gonna ask again." She tilted her head, glanced at the security camera above the door. Her lips curled into the faintest of smiles. Then she pulled out her phone, tapped a message, and pressed send. No one noticed the ripple effect that followed. 10 blocks away, in a private server room, encrypted data packets surged to life. 3 separate command protocols initiated simultaneously. A fleet of black sedans rerouted. The regional director of a global property management firm received a calendar alert titled Phase 1 Execute. Across town, a lawyer dropped his coffee when he read the message. Begin full audit of Landmark Tower. NDA override in effect. Back at the building, the woman slipped her phone back into her bag. She looked at the guard again, studied him with clinical calmness, as if cataloging his behavior for a case study. His voice turned colder. "Lady, this is your final warning." She nodded, and turned, not in fear, not in defeat, but with precision, like the opening move in a much larger game. As she walked away, her footsteps echoed in the concrete corridor like a countdown. 30 seconds, that's all it took. 30 seconds to be judged, dismissed, and humiliated because of what she wore, how she looked, and what they thought she was. But what no one realized, not the guard, not the employees watching from inside, not even the regional building manager upstairs, was that this woman, this quiet, ordinary-looking woman, was not just anyone. She was Elena Duval, and 3 weeks ago she bought this building. Yes, she owned it. Every floor, every marble tile, every smirking face inside. And what was about to happen next would shake this entire tower from its foundation. But before we go further, let me ask you something. Have you ever been looked down on? Ever been talked to like you were nothing, just because of your clothes, your background, or the way you walk into a room? Have you ever been made to feel small in a place you paid for? If yes, then stick around, because what Elena Duval is about to do, you will never forget. And if you believe no one should ever be treated like that again, hit the like button and drop a 9 inches in the comments. Let's see how many of us refuse to stay silent. This isn't just a story, this is a reckoning. 3 hours earlier, Elena had stepped out of a modest apartment on the other side of the city, deliberately dressed to blend in, to disappear. Her hair was tied back without styling. No makeup, no jewelry. The hoodie was from a thrift store. The sneakers were 15 years old. Everything about her appearance had been chosen for a reason. This wasn't a test. It was a trap. Elena wasn't just walking into her own building to see how things are. She was on a mission. Because she'd been hearing rumors, quiet complaints from tenants, stories of discrimination, intimidation, untraceable fines, suspicious evictions, even whispered claims of racial profiling by staff. All brushed under the rug, all denied, so she stopped asking questions and started watching instead. Today was the day she'd see it with her own eyes, and in just the first minute of her arrival, the building had already confirmed every suspicion she had. But this wasn't her first time being underestimated. 25 years ago, Elena had walked into a newsroom with a beat-up notepad and a fake smile, hoping to pitch her first story. A male editor told her, "You're not tough enough for this job." She didn't argue, she just started digging. And 2 years later, she won the National Investigative Journalism Award for exposing a corporate bribery ring. She didn't shout, she didn't threaten, she exposed. Now she was doing it again, only this time the target was her own property. As Elena crossed the street and disappeared into an alley, she ducked behind a van and took out a pair of black sunglasses. Her phone buzzed. It was her assistant. "Audit team in position. Waiting on your signal." Elena typed back one word: begin. She then opened her encrypted map. Red dots lit up across 5 floors. Key departments: maintenance, leasing, private tenants, and most importantly, security. Every one of them would be under review within the next 48 hours. Not from the inside, from her. Because Elena wasn't just the owner of the building, she was also the founder of Veritas Shadow, an elite investigative group known only to a few in the corporate world, specializing in internal justice. She had built it in secret. Now she was using it in public. The game had begun, and no one was ready. Because they thought she was just another nobody. They thought they could ignore her, mock her, dismiss her. What they didn't realize was that the woman they shoved off the steps this morning was the one who held the future of their careers, their companies, and their reputations in the palm of her hand. She gave them 30 seconds. They'll remember it for the rest of their lives. 4 years ago, Elena Duval stood in a courtroom as her mother, 68 years old and frail from radiation, was ordered to vacate the apartment she'd lived in for over 3 decades. The judge didn't look up once during the ruling. The property had been acquired by a real estate trust. Rents tripled. Notices delivered without mercy. No appeal. No explanation. Just signatures and silence. Elena remembered her mother's hands trembling as she clutched the eviction letter. "I guess home doesn't mean anything anymore," her mother whispered. That moment never left her. That's when Elena made a vow, not out loud, not with vengeance, but a quiet surgical promise to herself. "I will never let anyone decide who belongs and who doesn't, based on a zip code or a dress code." She sold her shares in a tech startup she helped build, cashed out, and disappeared from the spotlight. She stopped doing interviews, declined awards, turned down board seats. Instead, she started buying property. Not to collect rent, not to build condos, but to reclaim power. Under the shell of Duval Holdings, she acquired controlling interest in over 24 commercial properties, using a web of trusts and silent partnerships to stay hidden. And then she set her sights on one building, Landmark Tower. The building where her mother had once been stopped in the lobby and asked, "Are you sure you're in the right place, ma'am?" The same building that now housed boutique firms, private equity offices, and tenants who wore $1,000 suits and looked past janitors like they were invisible. Elena didn't want to own it, she wanted to know if it deserved to exist. So she bought it, quietly, legally, completely, and not a single tenant knew. Not yet, because today wasn't about celebration. Today was an investigation. The security guard who shoved her was just the first line of contact, but there were more. She had a list. 10 names flagged from anonymous complaints, employees in management, security, leasing, and even inside certain companies, accused of discrimination, verbal abuse, intimidation. None of them disciplined. None of them reported officially, because no one wanted to rock the boat. No one wanted to go up against power. But what happens when power walks in dressed like a nobody? That's what Elena was here to find out. By the time she made her way to the underground parking garage, the audit team had already begun their sweep. They weren't just looking at numbers. They were pulling access logs, reviewing security camera behavior patterns, collecting internal messages from building management, and cross-checking maintenance records. But Elena wasn't waiting for the final report. She wanted to see it, feel it, live it. She took the freight elevator, because the front elevators required badge access. The camera in the corner blinked red, She looked straight into it. "Let them watch," she muttered. The elevator groaned as it climbed to the 10th floor. Elena stepped out into a hallway where artificial air conditioning hummed and polished walls reflected her image like a ghost. She passed a leasing office. A woman inside glanced up, frowned, and immediately walked out to block her. "Excuse me, this floor is private access. Are you lost?" Elena smiled politely. "I'm just exploring." The woman's voice dropped into condescension. "We don't allow solicitation in this building. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Elena tilted her head. "You think I'm here to sell something?" The woman blinked, uncertain, but stood her ground. "We've had issues before with people like you." Elena's tone stayed calm. "People like me?" The leasing agent shifted uncomfortably. "I mean uncredentialed visitors." Elena didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply said, "Noted," and turned to leave. As she walked away, she whispered into her collar mic, "Add Melanie Gates to the report. Leasing, 10th floor. Timestamp now." Back downstairs, a courier entered the lobby, young, Latino, carrying 3 heavy packages. The same security guard who shoved Elena blocked his path and demanded 2 forms of ID. The courier explained he was on a regular route, showed his badge. Still wasn't enough. While this happened, a man in a tailored navy suit walked in, nodded at the same guard, and was waved through without a word. Elena stood in the corner, watching. It was all happening exactly as the report said. But seeing it, that was different. It wasn't just inequality, it was casual cruelty, and it was everywhere. At that moment, Elena's assistant buzzed her earpiece. "Ma'am, we've intercepted an internal message chain. You'll want to see this." Elena slipped into a side hallway and opened her secure tablet. A group chat between 3 mid-level property managers. They were mocking a disabled tenant for requesting an elevator repair twice in 1 week. One had written, "Tell her to take the stairs next time. Maybe that wheelchair is just for sympathy." Elena's jaw clenched. Her hand trembled, but only for a second. Then she straightened her spine. "Send me their full profiles," she said. "We're compiling now," the assistant replied. "And there's more. A hidden fine system. Tenants are being billed for made-up violations. Late-night cleaning crews threatened with job loss if they speak up." Elena closed her eyes, breathing slowly. They had turned this building into a fortress of intimidation. But now, the walls were cracking, and soon everyone inside would hear it fall. By noon, the building was humming with its usual arrogance. The lobby filled with sharp heels, Bluetooth earpieces, overpriced coffee, and conversations spoken just loud enough to impress. No one noticed the woman standing quietly near the edge of the room. Hoodie slightly damp from the rain, hands tucked into the sleeves, eyes scanning every movement like a human surveillance drone. Elena wasn't hiding, she was waiting for the cracks to widen, and they did. Faster than she expected. A young janitor with tired eyes and scuffed shoes pushed a mop bucket into view. He was maybe 19. As he reached for a caution sign to place near the wet floor, a woman in heels stepped out of the elevator, tripped slightly, and spilled her coffee. The janitor rushed over, apologizing, even though it wasn't his fault. A moment later, the building's assistant property manager stormed down the hallway. "What the hell happened here?" He barked, eyes locked on the janitor. The woman waved her hand dismissively. "It's fine, just a little slip." But the manager wasn't satisfied. That's the 3rd time this month someone's had an incident on your floor." The janitor kept his head down. "I put the signs up. The floor was clean. I swear." Elena edged closer, watching. The manager stepped right into the boy's face. "You're not paid to swear. You're paid to not make us look like idiots. One more screw up, and you're done. You hear me?" The boy nodded quickly. Elena looked down at the floor. Bone dry, not even damp. No water, no spill. Just coffee and entitlement. She took out her phone and captured the last 10 seconds of audio. Then she turned away, lips tight. Her earpiece crackled. We've traced 2 offshore accounts tied to the property manager, her assistant said. Money is being funneled from illegal tenant fines straight into them. Paper trail's thin, but it's there. Name? Elena asked. Gavin Marks. He's standing 20 feet in front of you. She looked up, and there he was. Tall, smug, shirt pressed with surgical precision, talking to another staffer and laughing, loudly, like nothing mattered. Elena stared at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, low into the mic. Get me every complaint linked to him. Every incident, every NDA signed in the last 5 years. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and moved down the hall, unnoticed. Invisible again. Perfect. On the 8th floor, she stopped at a vending machine and watched a pregnant woman knock gently on a locked tenant office door. She looked nervous. She knocked again. No answer. Just as she turned to leave, a female receptionist opened the door slightly and peeked out. You're not supposed to come here. My check was late this month. I sent 3 emails, the woman said, holding her belly. I haven't gotten a response. The receptionist shrugged. It's not my job to chase down accounting. Please, I just need to know when it's coming. I'm overdue on my medicine. The door started to close. The woman's voice cracked. Please, I worked for this company for 5 years. But the door clicked shut anyway. Elena watched the whole thing, didn't blink, didn't move, just memorized the nameplate on the office. North Point Digital Group. She turned and walked away, whispering. Tag North Point. Priority review. Staff behavior log. Late payments. Payroll audits. I want it all. Yes ma'am, came the reply in her ear. It wasn't rage she felt, it was precision. This was deeper than rude guards or snobby tenants. It was a culture, a system, rotten to the core. And her mission wasn't just to expose it, it was to gut it. But this wouldn't be a simple takedown. Because some of the people inside this building, some of the worst offenders were protected. Legally, financially, politically. That's why she needed more than reports. She needed a moment, a turning point. And it came faster than she expected. 2 o'clock. A commotion near the West Conference Room. A black female tenant, maybe late 40s, professional, well-dressed, stood outside the meeting room doors with a look of confusion. Her badge had been disabled. The receptionist told her company's lease had been terminated. No notice. No warning, the woman said, trying to stay calm. You can't just erase us like this. A building supervisor stepped in. Your company's rent was late 3 days. That violates our payment policy. That's a lie, she said, holding up her bank receipt. But he refused to even look. People gathered. Phones hovered. Some recorded. Elena moved through the crowd, watching every face. And then she saw it. A flash of amusement in one man's eyes. Tall, white, custom suit. Rolex peeking from his sleeve. He leaned to the receptionist and muttered something. Both of them smirked. Elena's jaw tightened. She stepped forward. Not as owner. Not yet. As witness. As proof that silence wasn't protection. Excuse me, she said to the woman being kicked out. Do you need help? The woman blinked. Who are you? Elena smiled faintly. Let's just say I'm someone who doesn't like bullies. Then she turned to the building supervisor. Who authorized the lockout? He blinked, unsure how to respond. This doesn't concern you. Oh, it will, she said quietly, pulling out her phone. Behind her the crowd grew. Tenants, staff, strangers, people who were tired of pretending. And somewhere deep in the building cameras recorded everything. The smirk disappeared from the man's face. Because this wasn't just a confrontation. This was a fuse. And it had just been lit. By 3:15 p.m., the facade of Landmark Tower had begun to fracture. Not physically. Not yet. But the culture, the polished silence, the thin-lipped smiles, the hierarchy masked behind policy and protocol, it was starting to show its cracks. And Elena was in the walls, She had ditched the hoodie and changed into a janitor's uniform an hour earlier, in the maintenance locker room 3 levels below the basement. A uniform she had specially ordered to match the building's contract staff down to the ID badge font. Now she pushed a cleaning cart through corridors most executives never saw, through freight elevators that smelled of bleach and sweat, past rooms where real work was done and no one ever said thank you. This was her world now, and from here she could see everything. She had access to floors that were restricted to guests, break rooms where middle managers talked freely, stairwells where employees whispered the truth. And in one of those stairwells, she found her first ally. A woman in her early 50s sat on a metal step, tying her shoes, her mop leaning against the wall. Her name tag read Tina, her face worn but kind. They locked eyes. "You're new," Tina said, voice low, guarded. "Just covering for someone," Elena replied, adjusting her cap. "Temporary." Tina looked her up and down. Not suspicious, just curious. "You don't move like the rest of us," she said quietly. "Your back's too straight." Elena smiled. Old habit. Tina hesitated, then leaned in. "You're not here to clean, are you?" Elena froze. Tina continued. "Last week I saw 3 young suits push a blind tenant into the elevator and laugh about it. Security said the cameras didn't catch anything." Elena's voice barely above a whisper. "They lied." Tina nodded once. "Thought so." From that moment on, Tina became her eyes. She shared names, incidents, files copied from the trash, passwords she overheard. She didn't ask who Elena really was. She didn't need to. All she said was, "Just promise me, when the time comes, don't forget about the people down here." Elena promised, and meant it. That evening, a notification popped up on her secure device. A tenant, a Syrian immigrant named Kareem, had been hit with a fabricated noise violation, 3 in a row. Automatic eviction notice triggered. He had submitted proof showing he hadn't been in the office on 2 of those days. The leasing office ignored him. He worked on the 16th floor. Elena headed there next. She waited until after 6 p.m., when most offices emptied out, then used her access to enter Kareem's floor. She found his door. It was sealed. She opened a vent in the hallway ceiling, revealing a tiny pinhole camera her team had installed the day before. She tapped the screen. Footage loaded. Timestamp 2:03 p.m. Today, 2 men in black polos posing as HVAC walked into Kareem's office with a master key. 10 minutes later, they exited. No tools used, nothing repaired. Elena replayed it twice, then called her assistant. "Confirm identities," she said. "I want names, pay stubs, and hiring records. Pull building badge logs from every floor they accessed today." "Yes, ma'am." "One of them is already tagged. Contracted through Berkman Security." Elena exhaled. Of course, Berkman. They were a private firm with a long list of NDA-protected abuse cases, known for quiet solutions. And now, they were working in her building. She walked the length of the 16th floor hallway, silent as a shadow. Through a glass door she spotted a familiar face. Mark Vellum, the regional leasing director. Tall, expensive, perfect skin. The kind of man who never carried a bag because someone else always did it for him. He stood in a corner office, sipping whiskey from a decanter, laughing with another man. Jeremy Brand, CEO of a fintech company, with multiple complaints of toxic workplace culture. Through the glass, Elena watched Mark hand Jeremy a folder. Jeremy opened it. A spreadsheet. Elena zoomed in using her phone's long lens. She read the title. Projected Buyout Values, Target Tenants Phase 3 Displacement Strategy. It was worse than she thought. They weren't just pushing people out with fake fines and intimidation. They were monetizing the cruelty. Each row was a tenant. Each name, a number. Each person, a $sign. Elena's hands shook, not from anger, but from cold, calculated purpose. She sent the photo to her team with a message. Leak draft in 48 hours. Full drop after press conference. Then she walked. Back to the freight elevator. Down into the quiet. Her earpiece buzzed. Security is flagging an unknown janitor, moving through restricted floors. Someone's getting suspicious. Elena nodded. It's time. She stepped out onto the main lobby floor again, blending into the dimming evening rush. People were leaving the building, but Elena had just arrived at her moment. The mask would stay on for one more night, because tomorrow morning she was going to take off the uniform, walk through the front door as herself, and introduce the entire tower to the woman they tried to erase, and she wasn't coming alone. The building was asleep, but Elena wasn't. At 3:17 a.m., she sat alone in a silent conference room on the 21st floor, facing the city skyline, its lights flickering like distant memories. She had hacked into the building's access system, not to steal anything, not to alter, not to erase. Just to see, to understand the organism she had inherited. She scrolled through badge logs, tenant records, maintenance reports, and something in her chest ached. It wasn't rage, not anymore. It was grief. This place, this empire of glass and steel, could have been a sanctuary, but it had turned into a machine. One that crushed people and called it policy. One that erased dignity in the name of efficiency. One that monetized power and distributed humiliation in little envelopes marked fine, eviction, or termination. And now she had a choice. Burn it down, or remake it. She could expose everything. Send the press the full file drop, audio recordings, camera footage, spreadsheets, name after name after name. She could bankrupt the management firm, tank the tower's market value, ruin the reputations of those who had laughed in the face of kindness. She could drag their faces into every headline from Wall Street to Dubai. She could, but that voice inside her, the one that sounded like her mother, whispered, "And what then? Would the people at the bottom actually benefit? Or would the suits disappear and get replaced by newer, shinier monsters? Would Tina get a raise? Would Kareem get justice? Would the pregnant woman get her paycheck in time? Would anything really change?" Elena leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. A part of her wanted revenge. The raw, blistering kind. To walk into the building at 9 a.m. sharp, live stream the confrontation, and watch the world eat these people alive. But another part of her, deeper, quieter, wanted something more permanent. She pulled out her phone, opened her encrypted notebook, and typed one word: restore. The plan shifted. This wasn't just about punishing individuals, it was about correcting the system, because the disease was bigger than one man, one manager, one firm. It was cultural, structural, and it had gone unchecked for too long. She thought of Tina, sitting in that stairwell, waiting for her moment to matter. She thought of her mother, clutching that eviction letter with trembling hands, whispering, "I guess home doesn't mean anything anymore." She thought of herself, 21 years old, walking into her first job interview and being told, "We're looking for someone who fits the brand better." She closed her eyes and saw all of them. All the people who had been told they didn't belong, who were judged at first glance, who were talked down to, turned away, told no. People like her. People like you. She picked up the phone and called her assistant. "Activate Protocol 0, she said. "You're sure?" the voice replied. "I don't want a press release, I want a reckoning," she said. "But not just noise, not just outrage. I want a system they can't break." "Then it's time," the assistant said. "Yes," Elena whispered. "It is." She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city she'd once wanted to leave behind, and decided. Tomorrow at exactly 9 a.m. she would walk into that building as its rightful owner, no hoodie, no disguise, and with the full force of truth at her back. But she wouldn't come to destroy. She would come to redefine what power looks like. To remind them that respect is not reserved for the wealthy, that silence is not consent, that mercy is not weakness, and that the woman they shoved off the steps, she wasn't alone, not anymore. At exactly 9 a.m., the front doors of Landmark Tower opened with a hush, louder than thunder. People barely looked up. They were busy typing, busy sipping, busy judging. But then they noticed her. The same woman they'd seen days ago. The one in the hoodie. The one who was pushed, ignored, humiliated. Now wearing a tailored black coat, hair pulled back into a sleek bun, heels clicking like a countdown on marble. Some recognized her instantly. Most didn't, but they felt something shift. The security guard, the same one who shoved her off the steps, stepped forward. He opened his mouth, but she didn't stop. Didn't blink, didn't acknowledge him. She walked straight past him like air, her phone in hand. Behind her, 2 assistants followed, dressed in sharp gray suits, carrying tablets, files, and a silver case. 10 feet from the reception desk, Elena stopped. She looked up at the chandelier. Then at the camera, she spoke into the mic, pinned at her lapel. Begin transmission. Upstairs on the 16th floor, every screen in the building flickered. The glass conference rooms, the break rooms, the lobbies. One by one, every monitor came to life, streaming the lobby in real time. No logos, no intro, just her, standing there, live, unfiltered. "I'm not here for an appointment," she began. "I'm not here for a meeting, or a tour, or an interview." She paused. Let the silence expand. "I'm here as the owner of this building." People froze. Keyboards stopped clicking. Coffee spilled on designer shoes. Some laughed, until her assistant opened the silver case and pulled out a set of gold-embossed deeds and contracts. Duval Holdings. 100% controlling interest. No shell company. No investors. Just her. Elena Duval. The woman they shoved. The woman they mocked. The woman they erased. And now, the woman who owned everything. "I've spent the past 72 hours undercover," she said, voice calm, eyes locked on the camera. "I've seen employees harassed, tenants bullied, people evicted for sport. I've seen guards who treat uniforms like weapons, managers who treat power like a game." A murmur ran through the building like a wave. On the 5th floor, a leasing agent grabbed her phone and whispered, "Oh my God, it's her." On the 10th floor, Gavin Marks, the property manager, went pale. He reached for his phone, but the signal was jammed. All building comms routed through Elena's system now. Live, controlled, irreversible. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, raising her hand. Her assistant tapped a tablet. A new feed appeared. Surveillance footage. Time-stamped, crystal clear. Video 1, the janitor being threatened for a spill that never happened. Video 2, a courier being interrogated while a white executive breezed past unchecked. Video 3, Kareem's office being entered illegally. Video 4, a pregnant woman pleading at a locked office door. Video 5, the security guard shoving Elena off the steps. Audio, faces, names, everything. People watching in offices gasped. Others looked away. And then quietly, deliberately, Elena turned to the guard beside her. "You remember me?" she asked. His lips parted, but no sound came out. "I do." She handed him a white envelope. "Your final paycheck. Your access badge has been disabled." He blinked. No drama, no escort, just leave. She turned away before he could respond. Behind her, 2 more assistants were already walking through the lobby, handing out termination letters. Gavin Marks, Melanie Gates, and 2 others caught on internal recordings. One by one, the names of abusers were called. One by one, they were removed from the building. No shouting, no violence, just justice. And on the screens, Elena's voice. "Let me be clear. This is not vengeance. This is reform." She turned back to the camera. "To every tenant who was ignored, your rent will be re-evaluated, your concerns reviewed, your dignity restored. To every employee who was mistreated, your contracts are under audit, you will be heard. And to those who stood silent, but not complicit, your time starts now." She walked across the lobby, slow and powerful, then stopped at the front desk. Beth, the nervous young receptionist who had looked away that day, was shaking. Elena looked her in the eye. "You knew something was wrong, didn't you?" Beth nodded slowly. Tears welled up. Elena took a deep breath. "You didn't have the power to stop it, but you felt it. That matters." She handed her a sealed envelope. Beth opened it. Interim building operations manager. A gasp from the staff nearby. But I'm just, you're someone who noticed. That's where leadership starts. For a moment, the entire building held its breath. Then Elena looked directly at the camera, as if speaking to each person watching. If you've ever been judged before someone knew your name, this story is for you. If you've ever been silenced, dismissed, pushed aside, this is your moment. And if you believe it's time for a different kind of power, one that protects, not punishes, then share this story. Comment 9, if you've ever felt underestimated. And more importantly, tell your story below. The feed faded to black, but the building would never forget what happened that day, because justice didn't knock. It walked straight in through the front door. The live stream ended, but the shockwaves had only begun. Within minutes, clips of Elena's speech flooded social media. The shove at the steps. The phrase, "I'm the owner of this building." The silent firings. The elevator footage. The janitor's face. That's trembling hands. The folder marked displacement strategy. Hashtags exploded. #Elena Duval, #justice. In the lobby, #she owns it now. By noon, 4 million views. By evening, national headlines. Mogul goes undercover, exposes corruption in her own tower. Powerful reversal. From shove to supreme. The woman who took back the building and gave it to the people. But the most powerful reaction didn't come from the media. It came from the people who had watched the live stream with fists clenched and eyes wide. In comments, thousands began sharing their stories. I was followed in a store just for wearing a hoodie. I got fired for standing up for a coworker. My boss told me I didn't have the look for leadership. I needed this. Elena read them that night, alone in her office, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline. No champagne, no confetti, just silence, and stories. So many stories. Each one like a scar made visible. Her assistant knocked gently at the door. "We've received 147 employment applications in the past 4 hours, he said, holding up a tablet. Most from people who left this building voluntarily in the past 5 years. Elena nodded slowly. And the tenants. Emails pouring in. Gratitude. Shock. Some asking if they can contribute to the building's future. One offered to repaint the lobby free of charge. Elena allowed herself a rare smile, then turned back to the window. "Put out the call," she said. "We're rebuilding." The next day she walked the building, not as a shadow, not as a figurehead, but as a presence. She met with janitors and assistants first, then tenants, then mid-level staff, not in boardrooms, in stairwells, break rooms, rooftop corners where the wind made her coat ripple like a banner. She didn't give speeches. She listened. She asked one question: what would make this place worth staying in? And they told her. And she wrote it down. By the end of the week, every department received a new code of conduct, not written by lawyers, but by the people who had lived through the worst of it. Performance would now be measured by service, not just revenue. Respect was no longer a line in the handbook, it was a metric. And those who failed it, no matter their title, would not stay. A few left voluntarily, most stayed, and something in the building shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. The air changed. People greeted each other. Doors stayed open. Silence, once weaponized, was replaced with acknowledgement. Small things, but the kind that add up. The kind that rebuild trust. Elena stood once more in the lobby, the same marble floor, the same chandelier, the same glass doors, but something was different. Someone held the door open for an older man in a wheelchair. Someone else helped a courier carry a heavy box. And Beth, now in a tailored blazer, walked by confidently, clipboard in hand, greeted by name by 3 separate tenants. This wasn't just a building anymore, it was a statement. A declaration that power, when wielded with conscience, could heal, and that justice, when done right, doesn't humiliate. It restores. 3 weeks later, Landmark Tower felt like a different world. Not because of a fresh coat of paint or newly printed posters on the wall, but because people looked up now. People made eye contact. People said thank you. People paused, even if just for a second, to acknowledge the humanity of the person standing next to them. No one was perfect. But the silence had shifted. The floor that once pushed people out was now lifting them up. One morning, Tina, still in her blue janitor's uniform, was stopped in the hallway by a tenant in a tailored suit. "Thank you," the man said. "For what you do, for everything you see." Tina didn't know what to say. She just nodded, swallowed hard, and kept moving. Elena had kept her promise. Not just the policy changes, not just the restructured management, not just the open forums or the performance resets. She'd started a restoration fund for employees who had been unfairly terminated by the building's former leadership, giving them severance, apology letters, and in some cases their jobs back. She created a tenant justice board, composed of staff, tenants, and rotating outside advisors who would review all future complaints, transparently and fairly. And most radically, she put her own accountability on the table. Every 6 months, she would undergo a public review from the people in her building. No immunity, no PR spin, just direct feedback from the very people the system had once ignored. "This isn't about control," she told her team. "It's about trust, and I won't demand what I'm not willing to live under myself." Word spread. Other building owners began to take notice. Journalists called her an accidental reformer. Tenants called her the woman who watched and then acted. But to most she was simply Elena, the woman who listened, the woman who stayed quiet when she needed to hear the truth, and then spoke when the world was ready to listen. There was one final change though. Something small, personal. Elena had a brass plaque installed at the entrance of the lobby, mounted near the glass doors where it had all begun. The plaque read, "This building belongs to everyone who was ever told they didn't." No name, no title, just truth. One afternoon, a young girl, no older than 10, walked past the plaque with her mother. She stopped, read it aloud, looked up. "Mom, what does that mean?" Her mother smiled. "It means someone finally decided that fairness matters more than fancy." The little girl nodded. "I like her." And that's how it begins again. Not with grand speeches, not with viral videos, but with quiet ripples. With someone holding the door open, with someone speaking up, even when it's scary, with someone choosing dignity over dominance. Elena never asked to be a hero. She only asked one question. What happens when the person you ignore is the one who owns everything? And she made sure the answer would echo far beyond these walls. The camera fades in, soft, quiet. Elena stands on the rooftop of Landmark Tower, the city glowing behind her like a sky full of small beating hearts. She's not speaking at a podium. She's not in a suit, just a simple black sweater, wind brushing strands of hair across her face. She looks directly into the lens, and for the first time in the entire film, she breaks the fourth wall. She speaks to you. Her voice is calm, measured, but it carries weight. You've seen what happened in this building. You've seen what silence protects, what cruelty looks like when it hides behind rules, what power does when no one's watching. She takes a breath, but you've also seen what happens when someone does watch. A pause, not for drama, but to let the truth settle. Maybe you've been in a lobby like that. Maybe you've been ignored, dismissed, judged, before you ever got a chance to speak. Maybe someone told you, in one way or another, you don't belong here. Her eyes soften. I know how that feels. I lived it. I built this building back brick by brick, not for revenge, but because there are too many of us carrying quiet stories. Too many of us who've been told to shrink. She steps closer to the camera now. The city fades behind her. Only her face, only her words. So now I want to hear your story. Her voice drops to a whisper, like a secret she's inviting you to share. If you've ever been looked down on, if someone ever made you feel like you weren't enough, I want you to do one thing. Type the number 9 in the comments. Just that. A single number. No explanation needed. She smiles gently, because maybe someone else scrolling by will see that 9 and realize they're not alone either. A moment. Then she straightens her shoulders. And if you believe that power should protect, not punish, hit that like button. If you believe that every human being deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter their title, their clothes, their past, then share this story. Tag someone who needs to hear it. Tag someone who needs to feel it. Another breath. Steady now. Final. This isn't just a film, it's a mirror. And the question is, who are you when no one's watching? The screen fades to black. Soft piano music begins to play. One last line appears. The real power is what you choose to do next. The screen fades back in. It's dusk now. Elena walks alone through the empty lobby of Landmark Tower. The floor glows gold beneath her heels. The building hums with new life. But the moment is still. She stops beside the brass plaque on the wall. The one that simply reads, "This building belongs to everyone who was ever told they didn't." She runs her fingers over the words. And then she turns one last time and looks directly into the lens. I know you didn't come here just for a story. You came here because something inside you recognized this. Maybe you've lived it. Maybe you've seen it. Maybe you felt that cold silence when someone decided you didn't matter, before they even knew your name. She pauses, steady now. I built this place back to say one thing. You do matter, and you are not alone. A long beat. Then her voice warms. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something you've lived through, or made you believe just a little bit more in justice, in truth, in what's right, then don't let it stop here. She steps forward, now close, like she's standing in your living room. Hit that like button right now. Not for me. For every person who's ever been silenced and is still waiting for someone to say something. She nods. And if you've ever felt underestimated, unheard, unseen, just type one word in the comments. Yes. That's it. Just yes. Let it be your voice. A soft smile flickers. Because when thousands of us say yes together, the world has to listen. And if you want to be part of this journey, if you believe stories like this should be told louder, bigger, bolder, then I want you with us. Subscribe to the channel right now. She lifts her chin slightly, her voice calm, but full of conviction. Because this isn't the end, it's just the beginning. Fade to black, text on screen, yes. Say it if you've ever felt overlooked. Say it if you believe in better. Say it if you're ready to speak louder. Soft music rises. A final message appears in bold like, comment yes, subscribe. Because justice begins when you show up. The screen fades out, silence, then just the echo of footsteps.